What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy FPL and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video I decided to do a little bit of a different one, a little bit of an interesting FPL video, and I decided to code the best FPL team / draft that you guys can have. To start off the video, I'll quickly be touching on what I mean by this and in terms of optimization and how FPL is basically an optimization problem. And then further on in the video, I'm going to be taking a look at my own algorithm and then Fantasy Football Fix's algorithm and how they've basically predicted the best team that you guys can go into that Game Week 1 deadline with for the upcoming 2021/2022 season. So that's something you guys are interested in? Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So as I mentioned, Fantasy Football Fix are going to feature quite prominently in this video, and that's why I thought I would give you a reminder about my 65% affiliate link that you guys can check out in the comments down below. As far as I know, the algorithm or the Fantasy Football Fix algorithm and the kind of fixture predictor and the player points predictor are free, but you guys can check that out and confirm on your own by just checking out the website and going on and looking at the features. So if you guys do want to support me, you can drop that subscription link down below and it will get you, as I said, 65% off. So what I mean by coded the best FPL team is that I basically treated FPL and the game itself as a constrained optimization problem. Optimization means that you're basically trying to make an equation a maximum or a minimum. In our case in FPL, we're trying to maximize the amount of points that we get. And then there's quite a few constraints that FPL actually place on us due to the rules of the actual game. We'll touch on the constraints a little bit later on, but what I wanted to just explain to you is that we do have an equation which is our points, and the constraints are going to come in and actually bound us through an interval or a set value so that we have to kind of stay within a range or a certain threshold. So if you understand this, you can then apply it to basically any programming language you want. I personally chose Python because I know Python quite well. You can then treat it as an equation, constraint equation, and then solve for it and get a particular solution. How you solve for that solution is going to be up to you. There's a lot of different methods. A lot of FPL Twitter accounts actually have posted optimization stuff before, and it all depends on kind of how deep you want to go into it or how light you want to stay on the surface and not go into the data too much. So now going on to the constraints, and these are actually placed by the FPL rules themselves, and we've got basically three certain sections of constraints. The first one is the most obvious one, and that's going to be budget. So you know in FPL we have 100 million at the start of the season to spend. Each kind of player has a value attached to them. We can't simply go out and buy unlimited options. We have to stick to our budget, and therefore we do have a constraint relating to the budget. The second constraint section is going to be positional, but I also want to relate this to teams. So as you guys know in FPL, you can only pick a maximum of 3 players from each specific side, and then you also have to pick a certain amount of positions. So you have 5 defenders, 5 midfielders, and 3 forwards. You also have 2 goalkeepers that you have to kind of account for. So you can't go out there, buy 8 midfielders, and suddenly make an FPL side. So there we have another constraint, or actually 2 constraints to be honest. Then the final one is going to be the starting 11, and the starting 11 also relates to formation. So as you know, you have to have basically 1 forward, you have to have 3 defenders. You can't necessarily go for a out there formation like a 5-5 or something like that. You have to have certain constraints for your formation. Then also in your starting 11, the players on your bench don't score points unless they come on. So you have a couple more constraints there, and when you actually look at the grand scheme of things, there's quite a lot of things that are constraining our kind of FPL team selections that you might not have thought about when you looked at it from an open-ended view. So to kind of explain this further, now we get onto the coding point of view. What I did to kind of get my point across, give you guys a little context, some background, is I took last season's points, but I took this season's prices. So I wanted to make it a little bit more relevant to this season, so that's why I've gone for this season's prices. And what I wanted to basically show you is that if you guys had to go back and pick your last season's team, what was the best team that you guys could have picked? One thing to also note is that I took out Dallas here because of his positional change. So he's the only player that probably would have been in here that I actually did my own constraint on, and I forced him to not be picked. You can see that they've gone for a 3-5-2, which is actually quite an interesting formation, and a couple of actually interesting picks there, especially in that midfield. Starting off in goal, we've got quite a basic one. We've got Martinez in goal because he was the highest goal scorer in the goalkeeper department and even one of the highest goal scorers in every single position. So, I mean, he's a massive expectation to be in the squad, so he slots right in there. In the back line, we've got Target, Martinez's teammate, and which just kind of shows you how good Aston Villa were at the back last season. And if they can kind of replicate that defensive form, I think it could be in for an absolutely massive season in the 2021/2022 FPL season. We then go on to Cresswell, who was one of of those nice options in that value kind of debate we had in the last video. He was a really good option last season, and he comes in a little bit under the radar, to be honest. I haven't really seen him in too many people's drafts, and West Ham still have some nice fixtures. So are you picking him in your own draft, or are you going to kind of wait and see a little bit more? The final defender we have is Wan-Bissaka from United. A little bit of an expectation there, considering that he was kind of the most prominent Manchester United defender, with Luke Shaw missing a couple games due to injury. So he fits in nicely with that defense. But one thing to note in the defense is that there's kind of no real big value defenders. No Trent, no Robertson, no Diaz, Stones, that sort of thing. So they've kind of opted for some more mid-price options and decided to go more premium in the midfield and the forward department. Saying that though, the midfield does still have some options that are quite underpriced. We have Harrison here, who comes in a little bit cheaper than Rafinha, and that's why he's in the squad, because they scored basically the same amount of points. Rafinha did get less minutes though, so maybe that's why he's priced a little more expensive. We then go on to Ward-Prowse, who's kind of a little bit of an interesting one there, because I haven't really seen him in any people's draft, but at 6.5 million, he might be giving us a little bit of a headache there in that 6 to 6.5 million range. A really good value there, a couple of options, Leeds options, Aston Villa options. We even have Saar from Watford coming in there, so maybe Ward-Prowse could be one of the players that you guys do look at. And then finally in the budget department, we have Souček, who had an absolutely sensational last season for West Ham, and I don't know if he'll have the exact same season this season, but I think that he still could be quite good value for money if he managed to replicate some of the goal scoring form that he had last season. We then have two no-brainers there, Heung-min Son and Fernandes. One of the interesting things is that Mo Salah is actually not even in this kind of best team selection or optimized solution, and that's because he scored slightly less points than Fernandes did, but also Heung-min Son's cheaper than him. So Son could be one of those value picks, and I mean, if Son, Kane stay at Spurs, you can see that they're both in this kind of team selection. If they manage to pick up the form of last season again, they could be absolute FPL gold, but I'm just swayed a little bit by that Harry Kane price tag, whereas with Heung-min Son at 10 million, he's definitely on my horizon with some nice fixtures coming up. But Fernandes, Son, no-brainers in here, had a great last season, so no real expectation for them not to be in here. And the final player is going to be Bamford, who accompanies Harry Kane in that striker position. So if you guys did watch the value kind of debate, you would have seen that Bamford was one of, if not the best value for money strikers that you guys can have, and he's definitely on my horizon. I just have to wait for those Leeds fixtures to get a little bit better before I commit to the Leeds striker. But you can see the squad over here, and what I actually did, forgot to mention this at the start, I didn't really focus on the bench because my own personal opinion is I usually have quite a cheap bench, so I don't want to go for too much rotation substitutes. So what I simply did was I took a certain budget allocation and I minused that from my constraint of budget. So you can see, I think it was about 7.5 million that I managed to take out of my budget, and what that kind of allowed me to do is get a 4.0 goalkeeper and then 4.5 defenders, midfielders and forwards on my bench. So hopefully you guys kind of have a little bit of context now, and now let's get on to the relevance to this season and how this can actually help you guys. So if you guys want to kind of take it up a notch and relate this to this season, there's two words for you, and that's going to be predicted points. So predicted points are quite self-explanatory. It's basically the amount of points that a player is predicted to score in a specific game week. You can get super simple models here. You can do a historical predicted points. For example, let's say Mo Salah scored 7 points average last season against United. You could say, listen, this season, based on my historical predicted points, Mo Salah is going to score 7 points. Then you can get a little bit more intricate, a little bit more intense, and you can base it on XG against of the opponents, shots on target, expected minutes, for example, and all these things can kind of combine into your own predicted points model, which is going to be quite hectic. I personally haven't created a model. I'm simply going to be using Fantasy Football Fix's algorithm, as they do quite a good job, in my opinion, of giving you quite a holistic approach to predicted points. But why predicted points can help you is that you've seen with last season, what I did was I solved for my solution based on last year's points and maximizing them. So you need a kind of a benchmark here to solve for a solution, and that's where predicted points come in. They give you an expectation of how many points a certain player is going to score. Now I know this is football, and this could be completely useless, as football is unpredictable in nature. We can't predict anything, otherwise we all would be millionaires from betting on everything. But at least it gives us a little bit of a vision into the future, combining stats, opposition difficulty, things like this, to hopefully give us a little bit of a benchmark to compare our opponent players against. So now what you can do is you can input your predicted points that a certain player is going to score. You can insert your budget, your formation constraints, your starting 11 constraints, and you can solve for the best team over a certain period of time. That's exactly what we're going to be doing now. So So using Fantasy Football Fix's algorithm, they've managed to come up with the best team for the opening 6 game weeks. Now a little bit of context here, I did actually take a couple players out because it seems like the algorithm favors the expected minutes of last season, and so players like a Nat Phillips are favored. We also had a couple of options from Arsenal that I don't really favor, like a Callum Chambers and so forth. So I decided to kind of take those players out of the selection, and this is what Fantasy Football Fix managed to come up with. So for the opening first 6 game weeks, what's nice is, as you can see on the right figure, they actually give you kind of a transfer planner or a rotation planner. The blue players are the players in your starting 11, the green players are the player you're going to captain, and the red players are obviously the players that are going to be on the bench. And they kind of solve for the most points that you guys are going to score over the opening 6 game weeks. Now I will say that this algorithm is continuously changing, and the predicted points from yesterday to today actually did change as well. So just keep it up to date. Do remember that there is still 3 weeks to the kickoff of the 2021/2022 season, so you guys can still get some changes into that squad in these upcoming 3 weeks. And I mean, the expected minutes over preseason might change as well. There could be some injuries that drastically reduce the expected points of a player, because obviously that means that that player won't play in terms of the expected minutes, and so on and so forth. So just keep this up to date. But as I mentioned, I think this might be free to those of you guys who have signed up to the website, so go check it out if you guys haven't. But starting off with the team that they managed to come up with, inverted commas, the team that's predicted to score the most points. In goal we have Sanchez and Foster, a pretty template goalkeeper pairing in my opinion. It's a goalkeeper pairing that I actually have myself, so not too much surprises there, and it just shows you that Sanchez is still predicted to score quite a few points, and that Brighton defense is looking quite solid for the opening 6 game weeks. We then move on to the defense, and they've gone for Luke Shaw, Robertson, and then Fofana. So I think they've gone for Robertson here just because him and Trent last season scored a similar amount of points, and also Robertson comes in a bit cheaper. But you guys can simply downgrade wherever you guys want to and then upgrade Robertson to Trent, which is probably something that I would do. Luke Shaw, kind of a no-brainer there. Great season ahead of him for United, I reckon, at that fullback position. And then at 4.5 Fofana, I don't think you can kind of go wrong for a Leicester centre-back at that price. Simply great value to go for, and it seems like they're kind of favouring going for a cheaper defender versus maybe going for a Luka Digne, or maybe going for a Trent double-up in that kind of defensive position. Then going on to the midfield department, we have Traore here, a Bertrand Traore from Aston Villa, personal favourite of mine. If you guys did watch the draft 2 days ago, I still have him in my lineup because I just think in terms of value for money, he looks absolutely sensational. We then also have Rafinha at 6.5, a long-term option. I think going to be a great season for Leeds from an attacking point of view, and Rafinha is going to be integral to that attack. And then we of course have that double up in those premium assets that everyone has, Fernandes and Mo Salah, who I think look great for the captaincy in the opening 6 game weeks. You can see that Fix favours a Mo Salah captain over Fernandes for 5 out of the opening 6, which is perfectly understandable because I do think that Liverpool have slightly better fixtures, except for game week 4 when United face Newcastle at home, which I think is definitely going to be a Bruno Fernandes captain. And then going on to the front line, we have Watkins, Antonio, and Jesus. So Jesus is the interesting one here, and I think the reason why they've gone for Jesus is that if you do look at the Man City fixtures, they have some great fixtures in the opening 6. Yes, they do face Spurs in game week 1, which might put you off maybe going for one of their options, but I do think a Man City option should be in your consideration. And in terms of my own draft, I haven't even included a Man City option. So I've seen some people include De Bruyne, Sterling, Jesus, Ferran Torres, maybe Mahrez. Those are all options that you guys can look at. And the thing about them is that in game week 2, they face Norwich, which is hands down the best captaincy option in that specific game week. So thanks to Fix, it's kind of reminded me to maybe look at going for a Man City option and including one of them in my thoughts. I don't know if it'll be Jesus, but I still can understand why maybe they would go for him, because the midfield departments have some really good value players in maybe a Traore and also Rafinha. Watkins, Antonio, nothing has to be said about those two. I'm perfectly fine with that. Great options to kind of look at, and I would recommend that you guys include them both into your starting 11s in your initial drafts at least. They go on to the bench. We actually have some interesting options here. They've gone for Basuma as the 4.5, which is perfectly fine. No kind of risk there at 4.5. If you're going to go for kind of Gilmore, go for whatever you want. I don't think there's too much risk at that position. Then they've gone for Nuri. Apologies if I am mispronouncing that surname. It looks quite a tough one there for me in my opinion. But at 4.5, I've seen him mentioned as a potential 4.5 defender if you guys want to look at him. But I probably would opt for maybe a Lamptey, as I just think that he might be a little bit more secured in that starting 11. The final player is also going to be Semedo, and it's actually interesting to see that they favoured 2 Wolves defenders on the bench, but you can see why. With game week 5, game week 6, Wolves have some really good fixtures, and basically they're predicting that Wolves are going to score a clean sheet and maybe even some attacking returns from these 2 fullbacks. But let me know in the comments down below if you guys went over to Fantasy Football Fix, maybe you changed the constraints a little bit, maybe you put more emphasis on the the bench, because you guys can do that with the sliders. Or maybe you put your own constraint by taking away a player like a Fernandez and seeing what you guys can actually come up with. So as I said, drop those in the comments down below, or just drop your initial thoughts on optimization and what teams you think are going to score the most points in the opening 6 game weeks. But this is basically a wrap for the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did, and subscribe if you're new or have not subscribed yet. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying the content. Hit that bell notification if you guys have, as we'll be releasing new content every 2 days up until that game week 1 deadline. I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.